The sleek, organically designed Zarian medical ship glided silently through the atmosphere of Terran Prime, its hull reflecting the dull orange glow of the setting sun. Inside, 4 alien doctors prepared their equipment for deployment to the front lines of the recently concluded battle outside Argar City. Dr. Gizo, a Zarian with wheat golden skin and obsidian eyes that gleamed like polished gems, meticulously organized his advanced medical case. His long, pointed ears, extending a full 15 centimeters from his head, twitched occasionally as he concentrated on the task. As the senior physician of the group, he felt responsible for ensuring the mission's success. "The Galactic Council expects us to provide the highest standard of care," Gizo reminded his colleagues, his voice carrying the characteristic melodic cadence of Zarian speech. "These Terrans have suffered heavy casualties, and our assistance will demonstrate the Council's commitment to humanitarian aid across species boundaries." Across from him, Dr. Throck, a hulking Gamoran with moss-green skin and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, secured his molecular suture array in its protective casing. "I've studied Terran physiology extensively," he boasted, his massive hands deftly handling the delicate equipment. "Their circulatory system is surprisingly resilient, though their skeletal structure leaves much to be desired." Nearby, Dr. Prilix, an Amphrost whose moist, translucent skin constantly emitted a fine mist in the ship's dry environment, calibrated a series of neural regulators. "I'm concerned about their pain thresholds," she admitted, her large, liquid eyes blinking in rapid succession. "Amphrost medicine prioritizes pain elimination before treatment. Do Terrans follow similar protocols?" The fourth member of their team, Dr. Cathed, an aviori whose iridescent blue feathers shimmered with golden highlights when she moved, was organizing a collection of advanced tissue regenerators. Her wings, folded neatly against her back, occasionally fluttered in anticipation. "I've heard their medical facilities are primitive," she said, her voice musical but tinged with apprehension. "Surely that's an exaggeration." Gizo closed his medical case with a satisfying click. "Remember, we represent the pinnacle of Galactic Council medicine. Our techniques are centuries beyond Terran capabilities, but we must be diplomatic. We're here to assist, not to condescend." The ship's AI announced their imminent arrival at the landing zone. Through the viewport, they could see the aftermath of battle: scorched earth, smoldering debris, and the stark white tents of the Terran medical facility contrasting sharply against the desolation. "Prepare for atmospheric adjustment," Gizo instructed, as they moved toward the drop pod. "Terran Prime has 1.2 g gravity and a slightly higher oxygen content than we're accustomed to. You may feel heavier and somewhat lightheaded initially." The 4 doctors, each carrying their advanced medical cases, boarded the utilitarian Terran transport that would take them the final distance to the medical encampment. The contrast between their sleek, organic technology and the angular, metallic Terran craft was jarring. A grim-faced Terran soldier piloted them silently, occasionally glancing back at the alien doctors with an unreadable expression. As they approached the medical tents, they could hear shouting and see frantic movement. "Typical post-battle chaos," Gizo assured his increasingly nervous colleagues. "We'll bring order and efficiency to their operation." The transport landed with a rough jolt, sending dust swirling around them as the door hissed open. The acrid smell of smoke, blood, and antiseptic immediately assaulted their senses. "By the 7 moons," Cathed whispered, her feathers bristling in alarm. They stepped out into the harsh sunlight, the increased gravity immediately making their movements more labored. Before them stood a large tent, its once white fabric now stained with dust, blood, and what appeared to be burn marks from nearby explosions. Red crosses, the universal symbol for medical aid, were painted on the sides, though one had been partially obliterated by what looked like shrapnel damage. Gizo squared his shoulders. "Remember your training. We are doctors first, regardless of species or circumstance. With that declaration, they entered the Terran medical tent, and their understanding of medicine was forever altered. The interior of the tent was chaos incarnate. Wounded soldiers lay on makeshift cots, some directly on the ground atop thin blankets. The floor was a mixture of dirt, blood-soaked bandages, and discarded medical supplies. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, the sharp tang of antiseptic, and the unmistakable smell of burned flesh. But it was the medical procedures themselves that caused the alien doctors to freeze in horror. Near the entrance, a Terran doctor was performing what appeared to be open surgery on a conscious soldier. The patient gripped a leather strap between his teeth, his face contorted in agony as the doctor used a metal saw, an actual manual saw with teeth, to remove a shattered portion of his leg bone. Blood sprayed with each movement, some of it landing on the doctor's already stained apron. "Hold him still!" the Terran doctor shouted to two assistants who were physically restraining the thrashing patient. A few meters away, another medical professional was using what looked like metal staples and some form of chemical adhesive to close a gaping abdominal wound. The patient whimpered, but remained conscious, watching with detached fascination as his organs were essentially glued back inside his body. In another corner, a medic was using a crude metal rod to reset a broken bone, the sickening crack audible even over the general cacophony of moans, shouts, and hurried instructions. Throck was the first to react. His green skin paled to a sickly gray as he swayed on his feet. This is... He couldn't finish the sentence before his eyes rolled back and he collapsed heavily to the ground, his medical case clattering beside him. Prilix followed moments later, the moisture on her skin evaporating rapidly as she hyperventilated and then fainted, sliding to the ground in a graceless heap. Cathad managed 2 more steps before the sight of a Terran doctor physically reaching into a chest cavity with bloody hands to massage a failing heart caused her to emit a high-pitched trill of distress. Her wings spasmed once before she too lost consciousness, her feathers dulling in shock. Gizo alone remained standing, though his golden skin had taken on an ashen hue. He stood paralyzed, his advanced medical case clutched in rigid fingers, as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he had ever learned about ethical medical practice. A blood-splattered Terran in a torn white coat approached him, eyes sunken with exhaustion and ringed with dark circles that suggested days without sleep. "You must be the alien medical team," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm Dr. Morrison, chief surgeon. Are your colleagues all right?" Gizo's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. "They're experiencing shock. We weren't prepared for..." He gestured weakly at the tent's interior, unable to find words adequate to express their horror. Morrison's expression hardened. "This is a battlefield hospital, not a luxury medical spa. We have limited supplies, no power for advanced equipment, and more wounded arriving hourly. If your team can't handle the reality of wartime medicine, there's the door." He pointed to the tent entrance with a bloody scalpel. "Otherwise, wake them up and get to work. We have lives to save." With that, Morrison turned and strode back to his patient, calling for more sutures and antibiotics as he went. Gizo stood at a crossroads. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat to the safety of their ship, to the sterile, advanced medical practices he understood. But the Zarian oath of medicine echoed in his mind. To preserve life, in all its forms, by any means necessary when faced with death. With a deep breath, Gizo knelt beside his fallen colleagues and began the process of reviving them, knowing that the greatest challenge of their medical careers had just begun. Throck was the first to regain consciousness, his massive form shuddering as awareness returned. "Tell me I was hallucinating," he groaned, his deep voice barely audible over the commotion surrounding them. "I'm afraid not," Gizo replied, helping the Gamoran to his feet. "This is Terran battlefield medicine. It's..." Different from what we expected. Prilix stirred next, her skin dangerously dry. Gizo quickly provided her with water, which she absorbed directly through her palm. "Those patients," she whispered, horror evident in her large eyes. "They're awake during procedures. They feel everything." Cathed was the last to recover, her feathers still dull with shock. "We can't work like this," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It's barbaric. It's cruel. It violates every principle of medical ethics we uphold." Gizo looked around at the overwhelmed Terran medical staff, at the wounded soldiers awaiting treatment, at the bloody but determined faces of doctors fighting to save lives with the most basic of tools. "We took an oath," he reminded them quietly. "The circumstances don't change our duty." "But we can't use our equipment here," Throck protested, gesturing to their advanced medical cases. "The neural regulators require clean electrical inputs. The molecular suture arrays need sterile conditions. None of our training prepared us for sawing limbs off conscious patients." Gizo squared his shoulders. "Then we adapt. We learn. We do whatever is necessary to fulfill our purpose here." He turned to his team, his black eyes reflecting determination. "I'm going to speak with Dr. Morrison. We need to understand their protocols and what resources are actually available. Stay together and try to acclimate." Leaving his still shaken colleagues, Gizo made his way through the chaotic tent toward Morrison, who was now examining a soldier with severe burns covering most of his torso. The Terran doctor's hands moved with surprising gentleness over the wounded areas, his face a mask of concentration. "Dr. Morrison," Gizo began, forcing himself to maintain eye contact rather than look at the horrific burns. "My team is ready to assist. Please guide us on your protocols and available resources." Morrison glanced up, surprise momentarily replacing the exhaustion in his eyes. "Your friends are conscious then? Good. We need every skilled hand." He returned his attention to the burned soldier, applying a clear gel to the worst areas. "As for protocols, keep them alive. That's it. We have basic antibiotics, crude anesthetics when absolutely necessary, surgical tools, bandages, and chemical adhesives for wounds too large for traditional sutures. Everything else comes down to your hands and your brain." "But the pain," Gizo protested. "These soldiers are suffering needlessly. Our technology could—" "Your technology doesn't work here," Morrison interrupted sharply. "We have intermittent generator power at best, and it's reserved for the few diagnostic machines we have. Pain is secondary to survival. These men and women understand that." As if to emphasize his point, the burned soldier reached up and grasped Morrison's wrist. "Just patch me up, Doc," he said through gritted teeth. "I've got buddies still out there." Morrison nodded and continued his treatment. "See? They're soldiers. Pain is part of their world." He finished applying the gel and turned fully to Gizo. "Now, are you here to help or to critique our methods? Because I have 37 critical cases, and only 8 medical staff still standing after 3 days without rest." Gizo felt shame wash over him. He had arrived expecting to demonstrate superior techniques, to elevate Terran medicine through example. Instead, he was being schooled in the brutal realities of battlefield medicine by a human who had clearly seen more death in the past days than Gizo had in his entire career. "We will help," Gizo said firmly. "Show us where to begin." Morrison's hard expression softened slightly. "Good. Start with triage. Corner section has incoming wounded waiting for assessment. Sort them, red for immediate life-threatening injuries, yellow for serious but stable, green for walking wounded. Send the reds to me or Dr. Keller over there. Yellows go to the treatment area by the supplies. Greens get bandaged and sent to the recovery tent outside." Gizo nodded, committing the simple but effective system to memory. "My colleagues have different specialties. Throck is our trauma surgeon. Prilix specializes in neurological systems, and Cathad is expert in soft tissue regeneration. Specialties are a luxury right now, Morrison said bluntly. Everyone does everything here, but I'll keep their strengths in mind. He paused, then added in a slightly gentler tone, Look, I know this is shock to your system. It's primitive by your standards, but this is the reality of war. Adapt quickly, or you'll be useless to these soldiers. With that, Morrison moved on to his next patient, leaving Gizo to absorb his words. The Zarian doctor returned to his team, who had managed to compose themselves, but still looked deeply disturbed by their surroundings. We have our assignment, Gizo informed them. Triage in the corner section. We need to categorize the wounded according to severity. Without proper diagnostic equipment? Prilix asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. With our hands, our eyes, and our medical knowledge, Gizo confirmed. Dr. Morrison says specialties are a luxury here. Everyone does everything. Throck made a rumbling sound of discontent in his chest, but nodded reluctantly. I suppose traumatic injuries are at least visually apparent. What about our equipment? Cathad asked, nodding toward their advanced medical cases. Gizo considered the question. Bring the basic instruments, scanners, disinfectants, any medications that don't require special delivery systems. Leave the complex technology for now. We'll see what can be adapted as we learn more about their methods. Together, they made their way to the triage corner, where a dozen newly arrived soldiers waited on stretchers or sat leaning against support poles. Some were conscious and quiet, while others moaned or called out in pain. All bore the marks of battle, burns, shrapnel wounds, broken limbs, and worse. Remember, Gizo instructed his team as they approached the first patient. Red for immediate life-threatening, yellow for serious but stable, green for minor injuries. The alien doctors began their assessment, forcing themselves to work without their familiar technology, relying instead on the most basic medical skills they had learned, but rarely needed to use. It was challenging, humbling, and at times horrifying, but they were doctors, and gradually, their training began to overcome their shock. Hours passed as they worked through the triage area, categorizing the wounded and directing them to appropriate treatment zones. They witnessed the Terran medical staff performing procedures that seemed brutally primitive, yet undeniably effective. Slowly, they began to understand the pragmatic efficiency that drove Terran battlefield medicine. Not cruelty, but necessity born of limited resources and overwhelming need. As the day wore on, they found themselves drawn more directly into treatment roles. Prilix, despite her initial horror, discovered she could identify nerve damage through touch with remarkable accuracy. Cathad's delicate hands proved adept at extracting shrapnel fragments from complex wound channels. Throck, after watching several procedures, began to appreciate the mechanical efficiency of Terran surgical techniques, though he still winced at the lack of proper anesthesia. Gizo moved between his colleagues and the Terran doctors, absorbing techniques, offering assistance, and gradually earning grudging respect for his adaptability. When he successfully used a chemical adhesive to seal a laceration that would normally have required his molecular suture array, he felt a surprising sense of accomplishment, more visceral and immediate than he'd experienced with his advanced technology in years. As night fell, the pace of incoming wounded slowed, allowing the medical team a moment to regroup. Gizo found his colleagues sitting outside the tent, breathing the cooler evening air and processing their experiences. "How are you all coping?" he asked, noting their exhausted but more composed demeanors. "Their methods are crude," Throck admitted. "But I can't deny the results. I watched Dr. Morrison amputate a limb, control hemorrhaging, and have the patient stabilized in less than 8 minutes. With our techniques, the preparation alone would take longer." Prilix nodded slowly. "They've adapted to their limitations in remarkable ways. Their chemical pain suppressants are primitive, but they've developed psychological techniques to help patients manage trauma that are quite sophisticated. And their wound dressings, Cathette added, examining her blood-stained hands. Simple materials, but applied with such precision. I've been taking mental notes on their bandaging techniques. Gizo felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His team was adapting, finding value in this harsh environment, rather than merely enduring it. Tomorrow will be challenging as well, he warned them. Dr. Morrison mentioned we should expect another wave of wounded from the northern sector. We'll be ready, Throck said with surprising determination. I've been observing their drain placement technique. I think I can replicate it. And I've learned how they mix their broad-spectrum antibiotics, Prilix added. The delivery method is crude, but the formulation itself is quite effective. Cathette flexed her wings, which had remained tightly folded against her back throughout the day. Their debridement process, removing dead tissue manually. It's barbaric but necessary in this environment. I believe I can perform it with less trauma to the surrounding healthy tissue. Gizo nodded, pride warming his chest. We're learning. That's what matters. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Morrison, who emerged from the tent looking even more exhausted than before. He approached the alien group, his gait unsteady from fatigue. You're still here, he observed, surprise evident in his tone. Honestly, I thought you'd be gone by morning. We gave our word, Gizo replied simply. Morrison studied them for a moment, then nodded. You did better than I expected. Still too hesitant, too squeamish about blood and pain. But you learned quickly. He ran a hand through his matted hair. Tomorrow will be worse. The Vatrax forces have regrouped in the northern hills. We're expecting heavy casualties by mid-morning. We'll be ready, Gizo assured him, echoing Throck's earlier sentiment. Morrison's expression remained skeptical. We'll see. Get some rest if you can. Once the wounded start arriving, there won't be time. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. If you have any personal medical supplies that can be adapted to our conditions, bring them. We're running critically low on everything. After Morrison left, the 4 alien doctors exchanged glances. Our personal kits contain some universal components, Throck noted. Disinfectants, some basic pain blockers, coagulants, and our diagnostic scanners can operate on internal power for a limited time, Prilix added. Not enough for continuous use, but perhaps for the most critical cases. Cathette nodded. My tissue regenerators won't function properly here, but the organic bandages in my kit are adaptable to any species. Gizo felt a renewed sense of purpose. We'll inventory everything, determine what can be used effectively in these conditions, and offer it to Dr. Morrison in the morning. Now, let's follow his advice and rest while we can. They found a quiet corner of the recovery tent to rest, though sleep proved elusive amid the sounds of suffering that permeated the camp. Instead, they spent much of the night discussing what they had observed, techniques they could adapt, and how to better prepare for the coming day. By dawn, they had developed a new appreciation for Terran resilience and ingenuity in the face of limitations that would have crippled their own advanced medical systems. They had also gained humility, a recognition that their technological superiority did not automatically translate to superior care in all circumstances. As the first light of morning filtered through the tent canvas, they organized their supplies and prepared to face whatever horrors the day would bring. Not as alien observers, but as doctors committed to saving lives by any means necessary. They could not have known that their greatest test was just hours away. The morning began with a deceptive calm. The alien doctors joined the Terran medical team for a brief meeting where Morrison outlined the day's priorities and assigned roles based on the previous day's observations. Dr. Throck, you'll assist with trauma surgeries. Your strength will be useful for holding patients still during procedures. Morrison's matter-of-fact tone couldn't disguise the grimness of the task. Dr. Prilix, you showed good instincts for nerve damage assessment. You'll work with Dr. Keller on neurological injuries. Dr. Cathed, your dexterity with small fragments impressed me. You'll handle shrapnel extraction and wound cleaning. Dr. Gizzo, you'll float between stations as needed and continue triage as new casualties arrive. The assignments acknowledged their growing skills while placing them where they could be most effective without advanced technology. It was a pragmatic approach that Gizzo found himself respecting, despite the continued shock of Terran medical practices. They had just dispersed to their stations when the distant sound of explosions shattered the morning quiet. "Incoming!" a voice shouted from outside the tent. "Northern perimeter breach, multiple casualties en route." The medical tent erupted into frantic activity. Supplies were reorganized, treatment areas cleared of stable patients, and everyone moved with renewed urgency. Morrison strode through the chaos, issuing rapid-fire instructions that brought order to the pandemonium. There earlier than expected, he told Gizzo as they prepared the triage area. "Scout reports indicate a surprise Vetrax attack on our forward positions. Expect burn trauma, shrapnel wounds, and crush injuries from collapsed bunkers." Gizzo nodded, mentally reviewing what he had learned about treating such injuries under primitive conditions. "We're ready." Morrison's expression suggested he doubted this claim, but he merely nodded and moved on to prepare the surgical station. The first casualties arrived minutes later, 3 soldiers with relatively minor injuries who had been transported together. The alien doctors handled their assessment efficiently, categorizing them as green and directing them to the appropriate treatment area. Then the flood began. Stretcher after stretcher arrived, bearing soldiers with injuries far more severe than those they had treated the previous day. Burns that had charred limbs beyond recognition, abdominal wounds with exposed, damaged organs, crushed limbs that hung by threads of tissue, head traumas that had soldiers convulsing or unconscious with alarming neurological signs. The alien doctors froze momentarily, overwhelmed by the scale and severity of the injuries. Even Gizzo, who had maintained his composure through the previous day's challenges, felt his resolve waver. Morrison's voice cut through their hesitation like a blade. "There's no time for shock," he shouted as he rushed past with a critically injured soldier. "Help or get out! No middle ground today!" The harsh words snapped them back to their purpose. They exchanged glances, each seeing in the other's eyes a mixture of fear and determination. Then, without a word, they moved to their assigned stations and began to work. Throck found himself holding down a thrashing soldier, while Morrison amputated a leg that had been crushed beyond salvation. The Gamoran's powerful hands were gentle but unyielding as the patient screamed in agony, despite the crude anesthetic. When the procedure was complete, Morrison moved immediately to the next critical case, leaving Throck to apply pressure bandages to the stump and administer antibiotics. Instead of recoiling from the brutality, Throck surprised himself by recognizing the necessity of the procedure and the skill with which it had been performed, despite the limitations. When a similar case arrived minutes later, he found himself volunteering to assist again, this time more confidently. Prilix worked alongside Dr. Keller, a neurologist by training who now treated everything from concussions to spinal injuries with the same grim efficiency. Initially overwhelmed by the blood and the patient's pain, Prilix gradually found focus in the challenging diagnostic puzzles each injury presented. Without her neural scanners, she was forced to rely on pupillary responses, reflex testing, and careful palpation of injured areas, ancient techniques she had studied but rarely needed to employ. When she correctly identified a developing subdural hematoma based solely on subtle changes in a patient's verbal responses, Dr. Keller gave her a look of genuine respect before they rushed the soldier to emergency surgery. Cathed, despite her initial revulsion at handling open wounds, discovered that her natural aviary dexterity made her exceptionally skilled at extracting shrapnel and debris from complex wound tracks. Her slender fingers could reach fragments that Terran doctors struggled to access, and her keen eyesight allowed her to spot metallic particles too small for human detection without magnification. "You have good hands," a Terran nurse commented, as Cathode extracted a near-microscopic metal sliver that had been causing a soldier intense pain. "Ever consider a career in Terran medicine?" The question, asked in the midst of chaos, startled a laugh from Cathode, the first moment of lightness she had experienced since their arrival. The sound was so unexpected that several nearby medical staff looked up in surprise before returning to their grim work. Gizo moved between stations, applying his rapidly expanding knowledge of Terran battlefield medicine wherever needed. He assisted with a chest tube insertion, helped stabilize a patient during a seizure, and performed basic surgeries that would have been handled by automated systems in any Galactic Council facility. Each procedure added to his growing respect for the Terran doctors who performed such work daily, without the benefits of his advanced training and technology. Hours passed in a blur of blood, pain, and focused intensity. The alien doctors lost track of time, aware only of the endless stream of wounded and the growing fatigue in their muscles. The 1.2 g gravity of Terran Prime, slightly heavier than they were accustomed to, added to their exhaustion, making every movement require additional effort. Yet, they persevered, driven by a combination of professional duty and newfound respect for their Terran colleagues, who somehow maintained their pace despite days of similar exertion. Just as the flow of casualties began to slow, a deafening explosion shook the entire medical compound. The ground trembled, equipment clattered to the floor, and dust sifted down from the tent canvas. "We're under attack!" someone shouted from outside. "Vatrax artillery! They're targeting the medical station!" Morrison's voice rose above the ensuing panic. "Everyone stay calm and continue working. Security teams will handle defense. Our job is to treat the wounded, regardless of what's happening outside." Another explosion, closer this time, sent more dust and debris showering down. A support pole near the entrance cracked ominously. "Structural compromise in Sector 1, a Terran nurse called out. "We need to relocate those patients." In the midst of the chaos, Gizo saw Throck, Prilix, and Cathode looking to him with expressions of barely contained terror. They had signed on for a humanitarian mission, not to be under direct fire in a combat zone. Galactic Council medical personnel were protected by treaties that were clearly not being honored by the Vatrax forces. Gizo moved quickly to his team, gathering them in a relatively quiet corner amid the frantic activity. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice low but intense. "This isn't what we expected. It's not safe. But look around you. These Terran medical staff aren't abandoning their patients despite the danger. Can we do any less?" Throck's massive form seemed diminished by fear. "Gizo, we're not combat medics. We're research physicians. This is well beyond our training or duty." "We came to help," Prilix added, her skin alarmingly dry from stress. "But we can't help if we're dead." Cathode's feathers were flattened against her body in the avian equivalent of extreme distress. "The Galactic Council would understand if we withdrew under these circumstances. Self-preservation is not cowardice." Another explosion rocked the tent. Closer still. Shouts and screams intensified as a section of the canvas was torn open by shrapnel, exposing several treatment areas to the chaos outside. Through the gap, they could see soldiers running to defensive positions and the orange glow of fires burning throughout the compound. Gizo looked at his team, then at the wounded Terran soldiers who still needed care. In that moment, he made a decision that would define not just this mission, but their understanding of what it truly meant to be a doctor. "You're right," he told his colleagues, his black eyes reflecting the determination that had crystallized within him. "The Council would understand if we left. But would we understand it ourselves? Would we be able to call ourselves doctors if we abandoned these patients to die?" He gestured to the Terrans working frantically despite the danger. They have no advanced technology, no neural regulators, no molecular sutures, just their hands, their knowledge, and their courage. They're showing us what medicine truly is at its core. Not about perfect conditions or ideal technology, but about preserving life, no matter the circumstances. The tent shook again with another nearby impact. A Terran nurse shouted for assistance as a patient's wound reopened during the commotion. "I'm staying," Gizo declared firmly. "I took an oath to preserve life by any means necessary when faced with death. That oath doesn't come with exceptions for personal safety or comfortable working conditions." He looked at each of his colleagues in turn. "But you must make your own choices. I won't think less of you if you seek safety." For a long moment, his three colleagues stood silent, internal conflicts visible in their expressions. Then, to Gizo's profound relief, Throck straightened to his full imposing height. "The Gamoran medical tradition teaches that a doctor who abandons patients in crisis surrenders the right to be called healer," he rumbled. "I will stay." Prilix's skin rippled with moisture as she regained her composure. "Amfrost physicians believe that comfort is the enemy of growth. I have never been more uncomfortable, nor have I learned more in so short a time. I will stay as well." Cathid's feathers slowly rose from their flattened position as she made her decision. Aviori medicine holds that the true measure of a doctor is found not in their knowledge, but in their presence when needed most. I cannot leave knowing I am needed here. Gizo felt a surge of pride in his team that eclipsed any he had experienced in his medical career. "Then let's get back to work. These patients need us now more than ever." As they dispersed to their stations, Morrison intercepted Gizo. The Terran doctor's face was streaked with blood and grime, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion, but his expression showed grudging respect. "I saw your little team meeting," he said bluntly. "Thought for sure you were planning your escape. Can't say I'd have blamed you." Gizo met his gaze steadily. "We're doctors. This is where we belong." Morrison studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Because we've got incoming critical cases from the eastern barricade collapse, and I need every skilled hand." He hesitated, then added, "Your team is doing better than I expected. You learn fast." Before Gizo could respond, the medical tent's entrance burst open as stretcher-bearers rushed in with the first casualties from the barricade collapse. The moment of connection between the two doctors dissolved as they both turned to the immediate crisis at hand. The next several hours were the most intense of Gizo's professional life. Artillery continued to fall sporadically around the medical compound, though with decreasing frequency, as Terran counter-battery fire suppressed the Vitrax positions. The alien doctors worked through their fear, focusing on each patient in turn, gradually incorporating Terran techniques into their own medical knowledge to create a hybrid approach that proved surprisingly effective. Throck developed a modified drainage technique that combined Gamoran pressure principles with Terran materials, reducing infection rates in deep wound channels. Prilix discovered that her natural Amfrost sensitivity to electrical impulses allowed her to monitor patients' neurological responses without equipment, providing crucial early warnings of complications. Cathid adapted avian precision movements to perform delicate vascular repairs that even experienced Terran surgeons found challenging. And Gizo, watching his team evolve before his eyes, felt a profound shift in his understanding of medical practice. The technology he had once considered essential now seemed like a luxury, valuable but not definitive. The core of medicine, the commitment to preserving life through knowledge, skill, and unwavering dedication, remained the same across species and circumstances. As night fell once more, the artillery attacks ceased entirely. Word spread through the compound that Terran reinforcements had finally broken through to their position and secured the perimeter. The immediate danger had passed, though the work of treating the wounded continued unabated. By midnight, the flow of critical cases had finally slowed to a trickle. The medical staff, both Terran and alien, moved with the mechanical precision of the deeply exhausted, completing necessary tasks through muscle memory and stubborn determination rather than conscious thought. Morrison, who had been operating continuously for over 20 hours, finally stepped away from the surgical station, his hands trembling from fatigue. He found Gizzo administering antibiotics to a row of post-operative patients. "We've stabilized the last of the critical cases," Morrison said, his voice hoarse. "The worst is over for now. Transport ships will arrive at dawn to evacuate the serious cases to the main hospital in Argar City." Gizzo nodded, too exhausted for complex conversation. "Good. Many would not have survived another day here." Morrison looked around the tent, taking in the organized chaos they had somehow managed to create amid disaster. "Your team did well today. Better than well. You saved lives that might have been lost even with our experienced staff." "We had excellent teachers," Gizzo replied sincerely. A ghost of a smile touched Morrison's haggard face. "Necessity is a harsh instructor, but effective." He rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "Get your team some rest if you can. There's a quiet area behind the supply tent where you can sleep for a few hours. We'll need you fresh for the morning evacuation." Gizzo gathered his equally exhausted colleagues, and they made their way to the designated rest area, a small clearing with simple cots set up under the open sky. The air was cooler now, the night punctuated only by the distant sounds of the medical compound and the occasional flare illuminating the perimeter. They collapsed onto the cots, their bodies aching from the unfamiliar gravity and the intense physical demands of the day. Despite their exhaustion, sleep did not come immediately. Their minds were too full of the experiences they had shared, the techniques they had learned, and the profound shift in their understanding of their profession. "I never thought I would say this," Throck murmured into the darkness. "But I believe I have learned more about medicine in these 2 days than in my last 5 years of practice on Gamora." "It's the immediacy," Prilix responded, her voice soft with revelation. "Without our technology to distance us from the patients, we experience their suffering and recovery more directly. It changes our perspective entirely." Cathed's feathers rustled as she shifted on her cot. "The Terrans operate with such presence. Each movement matters. Each decision is consequential in a way I never fully appreciated before." Gizzo stared up at the unfamiliar stars of Terran Prime, considering his colleague's observations. "I believe we have been reminded of something our advanced medical systems allowed us to forget, that medicine is fundamentally about the connection between doctor and patient, not about the tools we use." They fell silent, absorbing this simple but profound truth that had been revealed to them through blood, pain, and shared purpose. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them, and they slept deeply despite the hard cots and the lingering sounds of suffering from the nearby tents. They woke at dawn to find the compound transformed by the arrival of large transport ships bearing the insignia of Argar City's central hospital. Medical teams in clean uniforms, a jarring contrast to their own blood-stained attire, efficiently transferred the most seriously wounded to the transports. Advanced medical equipment, though still primitive by Galactic Council standards, was being deployed to stabilize patients for the journey. Morrison found them as they watched the evacuation process. The Terran doctor had managed a few hours of sleep himself, though exhaustion still lined his face. "Your Galactic Council transport will be arriving soon," he informed them. "They've been notified of your safety and service here." "So this is it?" Cathode asked, surprising herself with a note of disappointment in her voice. Morrison nodded. "The crisis phase is over. The remaining patients are stable enough for regular medical care. The Council wants you extracted now that the immediate danger has passed." "I'm not sure we're ready to leave," Throck admitted, his rumbling voice unusually soft. I understand, Morrison said, and from his expression, it was clear he truly did. Combat medicine creates bonds quickly. You've been through something transformative together. He gestured to the alien doctor's medical cases, still largely unopened since their arrival. You came with technology you couldn't use and found yourselves relying on skills you didn't know you had. That changes people, doctors especially. Prillix's skin shimmered with renewed moisture as her emotional state stabilized. We came to teach and found ourselves learning instead. The best doctors are always learning, Morrison replied, with unexpected gentleness. Your humility in adapting to our methods, instead of insisting on your own way, saved many lives. The soldiers you treated won't forget that. Gizo felt a complex emotion well up within him, pride mingled with humility, satisfaction tangled with a new kind of uncertainty. When we return to the Galactic Council, we will need to reconsider some of our fundamental assumptions about medical training and technology dependence. Perhaps, Morrison suggested, your experience here could inform a new approach to emergency medicine throughout Council space, one that balances technological advancement with adaptability to primitive conditions. The idea resonated with Gizo, offering a purpose for the hardship they had endured and the lessons they had learned. The Zarian Medical Academy would benefit greatly from such a perspective, he agreed, as would all Council medical facilities. A communications officer approached, informing them that their extraction vessel would arrive within the hour. The alien doctors used the time to make final rounds, checking on patients they had treated and saying farewell to the Terran medical staff they had worked alongside through the crisis. Many of the Terrans expressed genuine gratitude for their assistance, some with formal thanks, others with the simple acknowledgement of fellow professionals who had shared an ordeal. A few of the wounded soldiers specifically asked to see the alien doctors who had treated them, offering heartfelt appreciation that transcended species differences. As they prepared to depart, Morrison presented each of them with a small token, combat medic insignias that Terran battlefield doctors wore on their uniforms. You've earned these, he said simply. Whatever advanced medical titles you hold in Council space, you're combat medics now too. That means something special to us. The gesture affected the alien doctors deeply. They carefully attached the insignias to their blood-stained medical uniforms, recognizing them as symbols of a profound transformation in their professional identities. Their extraction vessel arrived precisely on schedule, a gleaming example of Galactic Council technology that now seemed almost ostentatious compared to the utilitarian efficiency of the Terran medical compound. As they boarded, they took a final look at the medical tent where they had experienced the most challenging and illuminating days of their careers. It looks so small now, Cathode observed, her feathers catching the morning light. Almost fragile. Yet what happened inside was anything but fragile, Throck responded. I've never witnessed such resilience. Or such clarity of purpose, Prillix added. No distractions, no bureaucracy, just the essential work of saving lives with whatever means available. Gizo nodded, committing the image to memory, the dust-covered tent with its faded red crosses, the exhausted medical staff still moving purposefully between patients, the stark contrast between the primitive conditions and the transcendent humanity they had witnessed there. As their vessel lifted off, carrying them back to the comfort and advanced technology of Galactic Council space. Gizo looked down at his medical case, the sophisticated equipment he had brought with such pride and confidence just days earlier. It remained largely unused, rendered superfluous, not by failure, but by the discovery of more fundamental truths about their profession. We will be different doctors when we return, he told his colleagues as Terran Prime receded beneath them. Not because we learned new techniques, though we certainly did, but because we rediscovered what it truly means to be healers. The others nodded in agreement, each lost in their own reflections on the experience that had transformed them. They had arrived as advanced specialists, confident in their technological superiority, and were leaving as something more profound. Doctors who understood that medicine's true essence lay not in perfect conditions or ideal equipment, but in the unwavering commitment to preserve life by any means necessary. In the sterile quiet of the extraction vessel, with the smell of blood and dirt still clinging to their uniforms, they carried with them not just memories of horror and exhaustion, but a renewed sense of purpose and an appreciation for the resilience of medicine's fundamental principles across all species and circumstances. The combat medic insignias they now wore symbolized more than their service in a Terran conflict zone. They represented a profound shift in perspective that would influence not just their individual practices, but potentially the future of Galactic Council medicine itself. From the chaos and suffering of the battlefield, they had extracted wisdom that no advanced medical simulation or theoretical training could have provided. As the stars welcomed them back to the wider galaxy, Gizo reflected that, sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. In this case, a primitive medical tent on a war-torn planet, where the ancient art of healing remained undiminished by the absence of technology, revealing itself in its purest, most essential form. It was a lesson none of them would ever forget.